Hi folks, Dan Verton here, Executive Editor with MeriTalk, and I'm here today with Jeff Hogarth. Jeff is the Senior Sales Director at Dell Federal, and we're here today at the 2016 FITARA Forum and the Data Center Exchange Brainstorm in Washington, D.C. Jeff, thanks so much for being here today.
Thank you, Dan.
Jeff, I want to start off just by talking about the new data center policy that came out of OMB. Which obviously significantly expands, restricts CIOs and agencies from expanding data centers without OMB's specific approval. Is that the right way to go, do you think, in your mind?
Well, from my perspective, I do think that Tony Scott has put the federal community on the right track here. And, so this is the start for the data center consolidation effort. In my opinion, I'll just use Dell as an example. We went through this process a number of years ago where Dell as an organization ran out of footprint in our data centers. So our IT folks put a BOM together, a bill of materials, and they presented it to Michael. And Michael basically took a look at it, and it was an exorbitant cost. He said, utilize what you have, the existing footprint of what you have, and find ways to become more efficient as an organization. At the time, we moved to a virtualization first strategy, but what we realized as an organization is the operational efficiencies as well as the cost savings. And I think we've got some parallels here that if you look at it from a FITARA and a Tony Scott perspective and a directional approach that he has now, the technology is available. I mean, this was several years ago when we took on the VDI efforts, and we've scaled since, but the technology is available now from a cloud perspective to a converged to software defined to a consumption IT model has definitely put the federal community on the right track here to eventually get to the data center consolidation efforts that Tony is driving to.
So our viewers will probably know that on the same day OMB came out with its policy, GAO came out with a report on progress in data center consolidation, which they found that 22 of the 24 agencies reported limited progress through fiscal 2015. So what are the specific challenges? I mean, really, what's standing in the way of agencies closing down these data centers?
Well, I think, to be realistic, you have to take a step back, and you can't claim victory overnight. So you can't snap your fingers and say, we're going to close these data centers because these data centers are performing services in support of the mission, and they're supporting end user community. So it is transformational in many ways as far as the ask. It's an IT transformation. It's a business transformation as well, and a mission transformation that we're going through. So it is a huge task that is being asked to go through from an IT perspective. I think another component that's important to be aware of is that there has to be solutioning done, and a lot of research as far as requirements and things, and then from a capital expenditure perspective, and then going out and doing the contracting piece can be cumbersome at times, and there are roadblocks, so there's a process that you go through there, and there could be unexpected roadblocks that are additional hiccups. As I said, I think this is a transformational component, that IT is going through right now, as well as at an agency level. And then finally, I would say inventory lifecycle management is another component too of knowing all your assets, who owns the assets, what program owns the assets, and having a good understanding of where those assets are. So it is a multi-step process. It is a process. But I think, Tony Scott in this whole FITARA initiative has got the federal community on the right track.
One of the things I hear a lot, and this goes to your point about, it can't be done overnight. One of the reasons I hear that it can't be done overnight, and it's pretty obvious, is that there are valid questions about the impact of closing some of these data centers down on the agency's mission. Obviously, they have to have those capabilities in place elsewhere before they turn the lights off. At a particular data center. So what is some of your advice in terms of how agencies can navigate that whole process from the planning through the actual pulling the plug on a data center?
Well, for me, and I think this is kind of an overriding aspect of the two previous questions that you asked, but for me, it's people, process, and technology. So number one, it starts with your people and having the right people in place with the right training. And if you don't have those right people, you may have to move people around organizationally with the right training, retrain them potentially, and or bring people from outside the organization who can help. So that's number one in my mind. Number two, it's process, and we have to remember, from an IT perspective, why you're here, and that is to support the mission. So, for an example, if you're a small data center folding into a larger data center, and you have the smaller data center may be more informal as far as their process, and the foldover is going into a larger data center that may have more rigor around the process and the way they run their organization. I think there has to be some ultimate give and take, some flexibility between the organizations, and remember what is important, which is supporting the mission and your end user community and end user base. So I think there's got to be some flexibility there. Technology is the other component to doing your due diligence there. I think that's another key element. But I think at the end of the day, if you do this the right way, I think the critical resources will, as far as the time given back from an organizational perspective, the resource optimization and the money saved will be able to be put right back into the mission.
Mm-hmm. Did you have a chance to catch the morning sessions about the discussion of the evolving role of the CIO?
Briefly, yes, I did.
So there's a lot of discussion about the CIOs of tomorrow in the federal government will need to be a different type of leader. Perhaps not so much the policy wonk, but have the policy chops, but also have the technological know-how. Maybe specialize in an area, cybersecurity, agile development, data center, engineering operations. What do you think the future CIO, and I say future, asking you to take your crystal ball out and look 5 years down the road, 10 years down the road, the federal CIO, what does that position look like?
Well, again, Dan, this is my perspective, but if you take a look at what Tony Scott and FITARA has done, it has basically given the CIO a seat at the table. And in my mind, the CIO has had one of the most difficult jobs in the entire federal government without having that seat at the table. So now they are there representing the agency because it's what they do is critical, from an overall perspective. So I think it is important for this individual to be a sound leader, have good technological acumen, be very rounded there, but also have the right business acumen. And I think that is, had that double-edged sword, so to speak. I think in the business acumen, if you kind of go forward and look at it, the CFO and the CIO are going to be very closely aligned. And the CIO is going to become that much more aligned. They've always been aligned to the mission, but having that seat at the table will be even more critical from a business perspective to understand the business and have enough of the technological acumen to be able to speak with authority. I think a strong leader will also be able to attract critical key talent. So they may be able to pull in someone who is a cyber expert, data center expert, utilize other expertises that can apply. But I think that well-rounded leader is probably the key element. Honestly, Tony Scott is kind of a good example, from a directional standpoint. He's kind of that model that I would almost emulate.
Right. Yeah, I've had folks even say that CIO of the future in the federal government, if they don't have that tour of duty in the private sector, they may find it very difficult to be successful.
That's a great point too. I think that's really, and we are seeing more of an influx too, and those individuals that do come in do have that kind of robust, maybe acumen from a business and technological standpoint.
Right. Well, folks, thanks so much for watching. Again, I'm Dan Verton, Executive Editor of MeriTalk. We've been speaking with Jeff Hogarth, Senior Sales Director at Dell Federal. Jeff, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you.